All right, people, we're back. We're up and running. This is your first lecture. What we're going to cover today is the 19th century ideologies, and we're going to look at Romanticism and socialism. Let me just give you a brief orientation. For the rest of the semester, you're going to get a screenshot of the visual presentations. I have reformatted the visual presentations so that you will have a thumbnail in the bottom corner of me doing video and lecture. And I hope that these videos will help you navigate through the rest of this material. What I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot video topic by topic. So there will be multiple videos and screenshots of the visual presentation for each lecture. So this one is going to cover Romanticism. Make sure for next time, for class, you have read all the way through Kuiper's work that you are going to have to write a paper on. And on Thursday's lectures, you will have a discussion on Abraham Kuyper. All right, so just to recap, we're going to talk about revolution of an idea and the idea of revolution, and we're going to briefly look back at the Enlightenment and also the Industrial Revolution. So remember, there's two kinds of revolutions. There's the violent militaristic revolution, and then there's the social revolution. 19th century ideologies are expressions of what's going on with these social revolutions that are taking place. In fact, when we talk about Romanticism, we need to see that Romanticism is both a reaction to the Enlightenment and it's also a reaction to the Industrial Revolution. So that you can be ready in thinking about Romanticism, let's just briefly recap the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment project was a project to seek human progress through the use of human reason, primarily employing empiricism. It used skepticism, the sensations, and experience in order to create a rational understanding of all of reality. It heavily emphasized the use of the intellect and the mind. This is the beginning of modernism. Now, also, when we think about Romanticism, we want to think about it in respect to the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is the result of this rationalistic enterprise that has viewed the whole world through the senses and determined all of reality through scientific exploration. All of reality became extremely mechanized through the Enlightenment. And as a result, that took a business commercial expression in the inventions and the business and commercial development of the Industrial Revolution. So when we think about Romanticism, we have to remember that the people who are living in this period are experiencing rapid industrial change. And so urbanization, lots of pollution, lots of density of population, a move from the agrarian society to living in apartments and working in factories and having really long shifts that are very mechanical in being a part of an assembly line or assembling some sort of small product. The development of the transportation revolution, the steamboat, the steam engine, the beginnings of developing kinds of technologies, engine connect technologies that are eventually going to lead to the automobile. All of that produces pollution as well. This is all going to create an interest in the imagination, in still emphasizing sensations, but sensations in a very different way. Sensations that take you not back to understanding all of reality, but understanding all of nature. So let's start looking at the 19th century ideology, Romanticism. Characteristics of Romanticism. Romantic authors, painters, and musicians questioned the value of rational inquiry as the sole avenue to the discovery of universal truths. That's a quote from Frankfurter. So they're not discounting the Enlightenment. They're not saying that the Enlightenment didn't exist and that it didn't have something to offer, but that the totality of understanding is not just rooted in rational inquiry. It leaves space for the emotions, the affections in the heart. It leaves space for creativity. It leaves space for imagination, for fantasy. It leaves space for spontaneity. And remember, when we say spontaneity, all of life is becoming mechanized, including the schedule of the day. The clock is being used in a different way to govern every hour and every minute. It's not just an agrarian world where you want to get as much work done during the daylight as you can. And so when the sun rises, you go out into the fields. When the sun sets, you go back home. And the hottest point of the day is the middle of the day, so you might take a rest period there. No, in the Industrial Revolution, you have a factory whistle and you have a factory clock that is determining incrementally every hour of the worker's day. So spontaneity breaks free from that mechanistic understanding of time. And then, of course, seeking solitude, going out into the countryside, finding a small parcel that's just yours and quiet, a place to be underneath a tree, a place to overlook a pond, getting away from the urbanization. One of the things that happened with Romanticism was the use of poetry, metaphor, feeling, ways in which to exalt human creation, and ways in which people were able to express their understanding and their feelings for God and their desires for God. Also, with the Enlightenment and the skepticism, they were able to lean into nature to dethrone God too. So you'll see spiritual people harnessing the romanticist mindset and idea to exalt God, but you will also see romanticism being employed to dethrone God and to turn people back to a natural revelation or understanding of the world. All right, so there are three main figures that you want to be familiar with for this class with the topic of Romanticism: William Blake, Samuel Coleridge, and Wordsworth. So let me just walk through these three transitional figures. They are all people who lived both during the 18th and the 19th century. In fact, Romanticism can find its roots in the 18th century. A lot of people even call the first Romanticist to be Jean-Jacques Rousseau, which is an Enlightenment figure that we talked about earlier on in the semester. So who is William Blake? William Blake was an English poet, a painter, and a printmaker. He was committed to Christianity, but he was hostile to the Church of England, which was the state church, the official church of England. He was a member of the Royal Academy. He was married to Catherine Boucher, and he wrote a lot of different poetical sketches. His major contributions was using biblical imagery in the making of his poetry. Four of his most significant works were The Cobble and the Pebble, The Shepherd, The Lamb, and The Tiger. Let's go ahead and look at one of his pieces. This is The Clod and the Pebble. Love seeketh not itself to please, nor for itself hath any care, but for another gives its ease, and builds a heaven in hell's despair. So sang a little clod of clay, trodden with the cattle's feet, but a pebble of the brook warbled out these meters meet. Love seeketh only self to please, to bind another to its delight, joys in another's loss of ease, and builds a hell in heaven's despite. So you can see him working with a lot of imagery. He's working with the idea of love. He's working with the concepts of heaven and hell, and how you construct both a heaven and a hell in the reality today. He's also tapping into the natural world and looking at a clod of clay, talking about the path of a cattle, and the way or the road trodden with the cattle's feet, but a pebble of the brook warbled out these meters meet. So there's an interconnection between the poetry that's being written and the story and the path of the story with the path of cattle on a trail. So this is our first example of a Romanticist poet. Second, we have Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Samuel Taylor Coleridge was a well-renowned English composer. He was of mixed race. So his mother was English. His father was a Sierra Leone Creole physician. If you look at his portrait, you can't even tell that he was of mixed race descent. And so his Sierra Leone Creole father was probably also of mixed race descent as well. He didn't have the healthiest habits. He was somebody who struggled with opium addiction. So likely that also can be connected to some form of melancholy or depression. He was considered the founder of the English Romantic movement. He was a literary critic, a philosopher, a theologian. His most famous pieces are Kubla Khan and The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which is quite a long piece. He also wrote his own biography, the Biographia Literaria, and he believed that the imagination was an essential element of literature. To him, the object of poetry was to express and arouse emotions with the help of imagination, rhyme, and rhythm. So here's a piece from him. This is from his complete poems, Frost at Midnight. In fact, what you'll see with each of these romanticists, there is a Penguin Classic book that you can access. I have them all on Kindle. They're great resources. I highly recommend them. If you find yourself very enthralled or interested in Romanticist poetry, I would recommend and encourage that you purchase some of these. But, oh, how oft at school with most believing mind, presageful, have I gazed upon the bars, to watch that fluttering stranger, and as oft with unclosed lids already had I dreamt of my sweet birthplace, in the old church tower, whose bells the poor man's only music rang, from morn to evening. All the hot fair day, so sweetly that they stirred and haunted me, with a wild pleasure falling on mine ear, most like articulate sounds of things to come. So gazed I till the soothing things I dreamt lulled me to sleep, and sleep prolonged my dreams. So this is imagery that's caught from his window looking out into the world towards the end of the day when he's about to drift off to sleep, or when he's trying to drift off to sleep. And there he sees the old church tower. Now, one of the things to think about with this Romanticist literature is that oftentimes there's this nostalgia or this recollection or recalling the memory of days gone past where spirituality and Christianity and theology and biblical allusions were more predominant. In many ways, these men who are creating this poetry are actually tapping into a sense of loss of the spirituality because the Enlightenment dethroned God and made it so that people were less interested in who he is, what he's accomplished, what he's doing, and maybe even disenchanted them to the point where they wondered, does God even exist? Is he even around? All right, this is our last figure that we're going to look at, William Wordsworth. He lived from 1770 to 1850. He also was an English Romantic poet. As a young kid, Wordsworth developed a strong love of nature and would frequently visit places with scenic beauty.